Welcome to another episode of the More People podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Fitzmaurice, CEO at MorePeople. Our guest this episode, Nick Shorter, Managing Director at Velcourt. Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Good morning, Andrew. It's a pleasure.
So, lots and lots to talk about today, as ever. For those who don't know who you are and don't know Velcourt, not familiar with it, give us the summary of your background and Velcourt as a business, if you would.
So Velcourt's a farming company. We manage other people's farming assets in brief, right across the UK. There's about 120 different farms, farming businesses across the piece, broadacre, combinable crop, fresh produce, livestock, dairy. We also do some sort of consultancy and advice work in that space. I'm a career lifer for Velcourt, so I was graduate of their management training scheme back in 2001, had various roles in the company, but predominantly down the farm management route, and then latterly member of the senior management team, farms director for the South of England for a number of years, and then for the last 3 years now have been the managing director of the farming company. So basically anything that happens in our UK farming operations, whether it's direct management or advice or consultancy, falls in my brief, my remit, if you like.
So Velcourt, man and boy.
Yes, indeed. Yeah,
So
unimaginative career.
So how did you get into it? Is it an ag background from childhood?
Not at all. No, I was lucky enough to grow up in a pretty rural part of the world. So as you may detect a hint of my accent, I'm a West Country boy, grew up in Dorset. All of my mates were farmers' sons or daughters, but we had no farming background as a family. So it really came from that. Just being exposed to farming from a young age, and then an opportunity just prior to going to college, having worked on farms as a teenager, to get involved working on a Velcourt farm. It wasn't a company I'd heard of at that stage, and then all of a sudden this whole world of the opportunity to work and progress in farming, if you weren't from farming stock, was apparent, and that's really where it started.
Do you see that happening a lot today? Because one of the challenges that we talk about a lot to our clients and on this podcast is the dearth of talent and how you attract new people into the sector. Does Velcourt see a big mix of people who have very strong farming backgrounds or not at all coming into the business?
Yeah, a bit of both is the honest answer. I think traditionally as an industry, we've tended to fish in quite a small pond, for want of a better description. But that process has really evolved over the years, and probably only a third of our intake these days come directly from farming stock, for want of a better description, who've grown up on farms or whose family are farmers. The guys coming from farming background bring a huge amount of experience, a huge amount of knowledge, but then equally they can often be short of experience or ability in areas like sort of people management, leadership, some of the sort of the more advanced business skills. So balancing that with people that perhaps come from a finance or business background, or people that come from an organisation or a leadership background, such as the military, means that actually we get a good cohort coming through, and hopefully we can layer those farming skills and that knowledge onto those guys that have less farming experience, and then use our wider experience and the systems and the processes we've built up over the years to give those guys with farming backgrounds, some of the more other skills they're going to need.
So back to the man and boy piece. You've been at Velcourt working in agriculture as long as I've been working in recruitment. What have been the most significant things you've seen change in that time?
Oh, crikey. Definitely the volatility. For the first half of my career in farming and farm management, you had all the usual farming challenges, like the weather and yield and technical response and that kind of stuff. But broadly, we were operating in an environment that was reasonably predictable. And I think certainly in the last 10, 15 years, certainly in the last 5 years, for relatively obvious reasons, we've seen huge amounts of volatility. You've seen input prices suddenly become 5 times more expensive than they were the previous year. You've seen output prices triple and then halve in the space of 18 months. So managing that risk piece, at a commercial level is hugely different than it was when I was at the beginning of my career. You would make a sort of 5-year farm plan, for want of a better description, and be reasonably confident that you'd be able to deliver that. Whereas, you make a 5-year plan today and 6 months later, you pretty much need to rip it up and start again, which again comes back to that skill set, doesn't it? That dynamic ability to sort of think on your feet. It's all, good practitioners can work to a solid plan, but it takes another type of skill to realize that your plan is very quickly out of date and come up with a new one, whether that's on a strategic basis or on a fly. But probably one of the biggest single areas, I was just chatting to a guy about this outside, is the scale of business. And where you've seen consolidation, necessary consolidation in some places. Over the years, farming businesses have inherently become bigger operations, and that's if you come back to the talent piece and bringing people into the industry, that's really difficult because, bluntly, when I started my farm management career, farms were smaller, they were simpler. You could go and cut your teeth running a relatively small farm for 2 or 3 years. Whereas one of the challenges we've got now is that we take people out of our training program and straight away they're into running, big farming businesses, because, a lot of the, in our sector anyway, a lot of the small ones don't exist.
Well, segueing from that and thinking about some of those challenges, necessity is the mother of all invention.
Yep.
One of the Velcourt's goals is innovation.
Yep.
There's ample opportunity based on market forces and climate to do things around innovation. What are the exciting projects and how do you drive innovation at Velcourt?
It's in our DNA. It was in the DNA of our founders. It's been in the DNA of how we've operated as a company for the last 50 plus years. We've always had a real strong piece around internalising R&D, that sort of inquisitive mindset, making sure that where we're learning lessons, be they business or technical lessons on business, that is transferred across the piece so people understand it. If to come back to your question about where do the innovations lie in the future, I think they're probably twofold. The first is technology, obviously, what new technological solutions are going to present to us. But if you look at where food production needs to go, it needs to decarbonize, it needs to be more benign, it needs to be more environmentally friendly. But that shouldn't, in my view, be separate to the conversation around technology. Anything that you can bring technology into, which means you can use far less synthetic inputs, which means you can maintain productivity but a far lower carbon footprint, is really exciting and will, I think, provide much of the innovation in the future alongside the sort of IT and the tech side of things. I think the other innovation will be business structure, business type, and how the dynamic of those farming businesses have changed and will continue to change. And I think that's one of the things that I've always found so fascinating in agriculture and farming, and one of the things that I've always really enjoyed and throughout my career and being part of the industry is just how quickly farming and farming businesses adapt to new ideas, to new technology, but also to the market environment they're in. That sort of simple notion of just doing it tomorrow because we did it yesterday. Farming is often tarred with, but in my view is actually the reverse. Everything I've seen over the last 25 years is that farming adapts really, really quickly. Both within Velcourt and outside of Velcourt. How we're farming today is materially different to how we were farming as little as 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, and that was materially different to how we were farming 20 years ago. So I think innovation will come in the sort of traditional view of innovation, as in new product technology, but it'll also come in new ways of doing things, and that's certainly our focus is on both.
So it's not just retailer driving CSR agendas that eventually drip feeds through to primary agriculture. The primary agriculture is actually doing its part to adapt and implement things quite quickly for the benefit of that innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're part of a supply chain. So, but that supply chain has always had a push and a pull element to it. So there'll always, ultimately there'll be consumer demand and trend that will influence retailers, and then retailers will influence practice through supply agreements in the marketplace. But then you've got the innovation piece on the farm as well that can see consumer trends, can see different ways of doing things, and are constantly looking whether that's environmentally driven, technologically driven, or just pure sort of pound, shilling and pence driven of different ways of doing things. So I don't think it's going to be entirely retailer led. Historically, what you tend to find is that a lot of the great innovation and change can come from the farming industry. And there's some great examples of that going on in the industry at the moment, where people have taken a kind of innovative idea, publicize that's picked up a bit of sort of traction, and then the retailers come back round. You seeing examples of things like sort of palm oil and that kind of stuff. I mean, that was very consumer led, and consumers started to say, we want products that are produced, without palm oil in them. And all of a sudden you had retailer contracts saying, can you supply your milk on a dairy contract which has got zero palm oil in it? And so it works both ways.
And farmers care about input prices and raw materials. They care about the soil. They care about the land. They care about efficiency. So why wouldn't they be doing their part to make all of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that has to be the route to it. The more environmentally friendly, the more sustainable, and the more benign food production has to ally with it being commercially advantageous. And I think it will, because ultimately anything that can sustain output with lower inputs, where whether those inputs have been reduced from an ideological perspective or from a contract requirement perspective, but what you won't have for very long is a food production system which wants to change, but it's not financially viable to change. So it will be, as ever, a two-stream process. There'll be good innovation that drives change. There'll be a requirement from the market to do that. But often, as those two elements come closer together, what's driving the sustainability of the technology change will be linked to the fact that commercially it's more advantageous to do that. If we can produce food that's more environmentally benign, promotes the environment, improves the biodiversity, improves the soil quality, by using less resources and maintaining a sustainable level of output, that's great for the bottom line. It's also great for consumers and great for the wider society and the environment. It will be very difficult to do that if you're not making any money in the process.
So whether it's retailers driving things, farms driving things, one current pop culture reference that's driving a lot at the moment is Jeremy Clarkson's farm.
Yep.
Which is doing its bit to put farming and the agenda of farming on the agenda of lots of people who otherwise perhaps wouldn't have seen it. Do you see it playing a big role for our space?
I think agriculture has always done pretty well in terms of exposure in national television. There've been farm tracks and country file and all that kind of stuff for a number of years. But I don't think any of them have hit the spot in the way that Clarkson Farm or the last two and a half series of Clarkson Farm has. I mean, real life is famously uninteresting, isn't it? Famously unentertaining. So the challenge for the producers of Clarkson Farm is to strike that balance. Is how do you convey some really powerful messages, some really important messages around food production and farming and the challenges that farming faces, whilst making it entertaining at the same time. Because simply sort of filming someone's spreadsheet for 6 episodes is not going to drive the viewers to it. So I think the team at Clarkson Farm have done a fantastic job of striking that balance, of bringing those bits of that information and those subjects to the fore, bringing that into government focus and consumer focus whilst being entertaining at the same time. I think credit to them.
I agree. So one question we're asking all our guests, it's our 24th year.
Yeah.
More people. With the benefit of a time machine, going back to meet 24-year-old Nick.
Yep.
What one piece of advice would you give to him based on what you know now?
Well, I mean, other than the sensible sage stuff, like buy a house sooner and put some money into a pension fund. So I'd have two things. So my first would be take people with you. I think it's a young person's prerogative to be ambitious, to work hard, to put all that sort of time and effort in, and that's laudable, and I would never advise anyone, let alone myself, to not do that. But it was some time, probably 10 years later, before I realized the sort of true secret of success is about making sure that everyone around you is succeeding as well. If you've got stronger teams, you're making your boss look better, you're making your teams look better. That's pretty liberating from your own perspective, but your own success and the success of the organization or the business you're involved in will be far better and far more successful. So first piece of advice would be don't think you can do it all on your own. Make sure that you elevate people on the way. The second piece of advice would be climb more mountains, and I mean that sort of both literally and metaphorically. I think as a young person at 24, I was obsessed with my sort of work life and working hard. And whilst I wouldn't change any of that, again, it's with a sort of older person's perspective that you realise actually if you've taken a bit more time out, and it didn't have to be a huge amount of time, but just days or weekends here or there to just step back, do something completely different, you realise that you come back on that Monday morning, refreshed, energised, with a far better perspective than you have simply by working for 24 hours over the weekend. And let's be honest, when you get to, my age now, 20 years older than 24, climbing mountains is damn harder than it was when I was 24. So, I wish I'd done a bit more of it then.
Wise words. Thanks, Nate.
Okay.